So now I'd like to introduce everyone to Phil Tocco. Phil is with Michigan State University. He's an extension educator and the state coordinator of the food safety program focusing on fruits and vegetables. Phil has been in that role since 2009. And Wes and I are fortunate enough to work with Phil on the National On-Farm Readiness Review Development Team. And so we get to spend some quality time with Phil, and then we get to pick his brain and bring him in to educate growers here on the East Coast. So thank you, Phil, for joining us today. We encourage people to use the chat box for questions. We'll be monitoring that chat box, and then I can cut in if there's something that we need to ask Phil. But thank you again for joining, and it's all yours, Phil.
So first off, I want to thank Meredith and Wes for the invitation. I do really appreciate hearing from other people in different places, because that helps me better understand needs and how they're different or the same across the country. Thank you all for joining us. I appreciate you guys telling me who you are and who each other are. One of the things that I find is that the people, as much as I may know some stuff, but the people in the room are the real experts. And so you who do it every day, there are going to be things you draw on, and knowing who's in the room is really important, because then you can take that information and maybe follow up with someone in the room, because there may be an answer to your question somewhere here. So I wanted to bring that about and let you know. In the same respect, when it comes to your workers may have knowledge that, if shared, may really positively affect the produce safety workings of your farm. So it's important to understand giving everyone a chance to talk about things can help bring them about. And we'll get into a little bit of that later on in the talk. But again, my name is Phil Tocco. I work with Michigan State. I have worked for Michigan State, Purdue Extension, and also Rutgers Cooperative Extension for a while. So I've had some experience in New Jersey as well. So when it comes to, let me see if I can get my slide advancer to work. When it comes to what we're going to try and talk about today, we're hopefully going to have an understanding of how to verify your training's working. The second thing we're going to try and do is discern what training is required for different employees on your farm. And then we're going to develop a process of training the folks on your farm. So I'm curious, can everyone get themselves a blank sheet of 8.5 by 11 inch paper, like letter size paper? And then I want you guys, I'm going to give you a second to find a piece of 8.5 by 11 inch paper and a pencil or a pen. And then I want you to fold it into thirds letter style, because we are all going to write a training plan on the fly right here as we're going through this talk. I think it's important that whatever we do is practical, it's easy to implement, and that we put it to use right away. So we will be talking through the steps of writing a training plan, and you will be building a training plan simultaneously while we're talking about it. So we'll give you an opportunity to do that. So I'm going to give you a second so you guys can go out and get a piece of paper real quick, and get a pencil if you don't have one. Let's build a training plan together. I said we'll get a blank sheet of paper, and then fold that paper letter style in thirds, and then have a pen or pencil handy. So we're going to build our training plan on that paper. And then when you want, the nice thing is, if you've got a pack house, or you've got a break room, or you got a place where people congregate, you can tack this up on the wall, not only to remind yourself of who you need to train, what you need to train them, and what kind of trainings they need, but also they can see what they need to be learning too. So it should be really transparent. And that's fairly important. So the first question we have to ask ourselves is, who's responsible for produce safety? Everybody's got a little role to play, but the question is, who's going to come into contact with the product? So anybody who touches the produce, anyone who moves food contact surfaces around, these are all of the people that we need to put in a first column, that who is going to be needing food safety training. So it could be pest, and I would group them in large groups. So like, for instance, Mark's probably got work crews that he often, with the farms that he works with, they have work crews. For some of you in smaller operations, I think of my garden as something I want to make sure I've got food safety background of everyone that comes into contact with the produce. So in my backyard, as being if I was making this for my backyard, you know, my wife sometimes goes out to pick produce before she cooks it. So she needs to be, at least have a little awareness of produce safety. And my youngest daughter, my 14-year-old daughter, needs to have some knowledge too, because sometimes my wife sends her out too. So we need to, on both scales, we need to think of all of those people. So it could be pesticide applicators, could be crop scouts if you got a crop scout out there, could be harvest workers, could be supervisors, could be graders if you've got a grading operation as part of your farm, could be the truck operators. There may be a situation like in blueberry fields. We've got a lot of situations where a custom crew comes in and there's a grower, and he calls the custom crew. They come in and they bring all their own equipment and everything, and they do all that. So the grower is the only one who has to be responsible for his own training and the training of the people, like pesticide applicators and such, that are in the field during growing, but not during harvest. So thinking about that, and write the broad categories down in that left-hand column. It's basically the who. So that left-hand column again is who is responsible for food safety. So for those of you that are getting close to done writing in who's responsible, what did you write in that column?
I added retail store employees.
I added, work crews, market crews.
Okay.
The market workers. We have a truck driver, the pack house crew, and pesticide applicators.
Cool.
Did a pack house and warehouse crew, pesticide app guys, my pickers, my gatherers, and my transportation.
Cool. Anyone put something in that first column that hasn't been mentioned yet?
We do most of that in 2 languages, so that's a little bit of a twist.
Sure.
I put down gleaners. I don't know if they don't work for me, but they volunteer on the farm. I don't know if they count.
They would actually, especially if those gleaners are coming in. Like if you've got a crop that gets picked multiple times, let's say you're dealing with something like summer squash or zucchini, and you might have a first pick and then have gleaners come in and pull out anything that in the interim, and then going back through again. They would certainly need to know a certain amount of food safety. Yeah.
Yeah. I added visitors to our list because they come in and, they need to be aware of what to do.
Yep. And just to drive the point home, from a FSMA perspective, the person needs to be invited on farm to be a visitor. So if the person is an uninvited guest, they are not considered a visitor under FSMA. Just want to let you know.
Yep.
Okay. So then the next column is, what do I want these folks to do? We're not so concerned on what we want to teach them, because learning is really not what this is all about. We're really focused on behaviors. So what are the things that I want these folks to do? And what you can do is you could write down all the different things that you want them to do in the middle column. So for instance, for my daughter, my 14-year-old daughter, if she's going to be out in the garden picking stuff, I want to make doggone sure that she's washed her hands before she goes out to the garden. And I want to make sure that she picks into something that is clean and sanitary. So if she brings a bowl out, she's not going to take a dirty 5-gallon bucket and stick stuff in a dirty 5-gallon bucket and bring it in, right? So in the same respect, there's different key elements that you want each of these groups to do, right? So like for those of you that wrote the pesticide applicators, that's a good one to try, because it's kind of hard. what specific activities or what specific behaviors do you want your pesticide applicators to be doing to promote produce safety? I can give you a hint, maybe.
We need to know that that equipment was clean when it went into the area. So we need
Okay.
a log of the sanitation of the equipment itself.
Possibly on a large scale operation, I would agree with you. On smaller operations, that may not be as big of an issue. But what is a primary issue is the stuff that actually touches the crop. So what actually touches the crop from a pesticide applicator perspective?
Proper documentation of equipment and of any spray tanks or spray booms or anything of that nature.
Okay, spray booms might, but active ingredient touches all the product, right? We're spraying stuff on the crop, right?
Mhm.
And what is the overwhelming thing that's in what's sprayed on the crop?
Water.
This isn't a trick question, it's water,
Water.
right? So if water is the primary thing that's being sprayed on the crop with the active ingredient, what quality is that water? What quality do we want that water to be?
Within the standards.
Yeah, within the standards, certainly. We don't want them to like maybe pull out water from the river that's that's never been tested, or that we don't know any of the risks that go into that water, right? We want to know, we want to make sure that water is from a trusted source or from a safe source, right?
Mhm.
So we want to make sure that they know that they are using water that's of adequate safe and of adequate sanitary quality. That's the FDA language speak. So, yeah. And yes, the quality of the equipment is important. The cleanliness of the equipment is important, but you can see where the quality of the water used in the spray is probably more important than
Mhm.
the cleanliness of the equipment. So, okay. So does everyone have some things in that middle column then?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yes.
Anybody want to share some of these behaviors?
I want my visitors to keep their pets out of the orchard.
That's a good one. I like that. I like that a lot. Okay. Anyone else have some things like that? Not necessarily visitor policies, but
I think the use of gloves is, say, if you're removing some dead leaves and debris and things that have maybe fallen below the plants, and you're moving that stuff out that might have bacteria or whatever, that you're using gloves when you're going back in. Well, when you're cleaning that out and when you're going back in, you've either washed your hands again if you're harvesting at the same time.
okay.
I don't know if I used the right language there, but
You want to make sure their hands are clean when they're picking produce. Would that be a good way to put it?
yes, but like if they're doing more than one task while they're there, that you may have to wash in between as well.
Are you seeing how we're sort of workshopping this? It's getting a little bit more defined as to what we want them to do as we continue to talk this through. Anyone else have some things?
All these, things that we do, we need to monitor them and make sure that they're getting done.
Okay. So
we'll do that with logs or with, actual watching what people are doing.
So you want to make sure that record keeping is happening. Right?
It needs to,
Okay.
in order to know that that the things are getting done.
Okay. So record keeping would be one of your critical behaviors that you want to see all the time, every time.
Yeah.
How many folks have to meet more than just the produce safety rule? who have to do GAP requirements or have special industry standards. I know Mark's got not only GAPS requirements, but probably special industry standards, knowing what he wants.
Harmonized Gap Plus we use.
Okay. Okay. So there's different requirements in those audit schemes, and sometimes even what the buyer wants. Like at Gerber, they have their own pest scouts that specifically tell them what to spray and when to spray it. So there's very specific guidelines in that sense. But in some cases, you may only need the FSMA PSR skills. So it's important to think about all of that when you're putting it on the page. And then focusing specifically on behaviors. Really, we want them to wash their hands before they pick produce, to make sure their hands are clean when they're picking produce. We want to make sure that when somebody is spraying water, that the water is safe and of adequate sanitary quality. So those are the keys to think about putting in that middle column. Okay. Anyone else have some things in the middle column that are key behaviors?
Making sure they don't come to work while they're sick.
Yeah, don't pick when you're sick. Don't come to work when you're sick. Absolutely. Barbara, if I got sniffles, is that a problem?
It is.
Is it?
Only if you're going to be packing produce and picking produce. You could find, don't you think?
It could be. Or, I mean, to you, it could be. Most of the disease symptoms that folks are worried about from a food safety standpoint are those that convey foodborne illness. So things like vomiting, diarrhea, nausea, jaundice, fever with sore throat. Those are some of the ones. Now FDA, I think it's only nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and jaundice. But yeah, but definitely if they're sick, maybe they shouldn't be working with produce, because that could potentially spread. The goal is to keep poop off food, basically, is what we're trying to do. So anything that's going to make it easier for poop to get on food, we want to minimize. So, okay. So now we've got the who, and now we've got the behaviors we want, the what. Now what? So the next bit is really to go through and find out what training do they need to get these behaviors. Okay. Now, you really want to think through the training resources that can help you in getting workers to behave how they need to. There are extension classes. There's the PSA grower training out there. You can do morning meeting reminders. Most folks that have work crews have a short morning meeting every morning, right? And they're telling them what they need to pick, what grade, where they're picking in, what block they're going to be picking out of, what grade they're looking for, all of that stuff. A quick reminder about washing your hands or doing something produce safety related is a good ad. It's a good way to do that. Another thing to do would be incentives, like incentivizing, okay, I put a thing of Jolly Ranchers by the hand wash station so that when you come out of the toilet and you go to wash your hands, you got a Jolly Rancher. Are you going to pick up a Jolly Rancher with dirty hands, or are you going to clean your hands and then go pick the Jolly Rancher up? You know, those kinds of things, although they'd have to rewash their hands, but that's another thing. That maybe not be a good example, but the idea being incentivizing good behavior, really pushing it to make it the preferred method. Really focusing on behaviors, really focusing on what things do I want them to do and how can I make it easy for them. Another good example is putting a hook by the toilet so that they remember to take off their if they're wearing aprons or they're wearing pick bags, to take off their pick bags or their aprons or their harnesses before they go into the restroom, so that way they leave that stuff outside, so they're not putting it on the ground. You know, and a hook, it could be a hook or it can be a big nail, so it doesn't have to be an expensive ad to really create an incentive for them to do the right thing. So write those down in the third column. We'll give you a second and see if what folks have come up with. Does anyone want to share something they put in that third column?
I actually like having pictures or icons as opposed to individual language, especially when you can have multiple languages spoken on a team.
Absolutely.
So, and one of the things I wrote down, a job function is sort of sanitation or janitors, who's cleaning surfaces inside a wash and pack barn or something like that. And then do they know how to properly mix the right solution in their water and things like that? How do they test it? So to show pictures of what's right, what's not right on the wall where you mix those chems, whether it's a produce rinse or a sanitizer. So that's one of the things I wrote down.
Yeah. Visual SOPs are really good. If you have a piece of equipment that needs to be cleaned in a very specific way, having pictures, visual SOPs, this is what set to zero looks like. This is the checklist of what you need to do. When you're done, it should look like this, and then have a picture of it so that everybody knows, oh, okay, when I'm done, that hose needs to be hung up on the wall. It doesn't need to be laying on the ground. You know, oh, I see what visibly free of filth is. I can't see any filth on this. It's clean. So they understand where the set to zero is by pictures. It works really well. I've seen some really good visual SOPs out there that have minimal writing on them, but have maximal effect because they use the picture to tell the story of what the grower or the food safety person really wants. So, yeah. Anyone else?
I have posted pictures, posted SOPs, all within the same areas where these actions are taking place, as well as on the exterior restroom doors and all entry doors, as well as on the inside before walking in or before leaving the bathroom as reminders and everything like that.
Cool. Yeah, that's also another good one. So now you've got, what you need to teach or what they need to do and how you're going to get there with them on that sheet. Now, the next step is really to do what's called an observational baseline and find a reason to be out in the field for about an hour as part of normal routines and observe how often they're already doing the things on your list. There may be some people who've got great hand washing technique and they do it all the time. And there may be others who don't do such a hot job that need a little bit of a tweak. Take note when they perform those unsafe activities and then write it down later in that second column. So you know which of those things in that second column you need to go double down on. And then really adjust your training needs based on that observation. If you need a reason, say you're doing pest scouting in the field, or you could say you're taking soil samples and get a soil corer and core around some of the plants or something, find an excuse so that they don't know they're being watched by you when they're doing their job, but they get an idea, they can keep doing what they're doing and you can get an idea of what they're doing. So start with that observational baseline. Once you've got this sort of preliminary list and then hone it from what you find. Then is understanding that training is perpetual. It's training, and retraining. Every interaction really should be part of training. You don't need to have records for all the training, but you do need to have records from some training and have that logged as being done. How many folks use a video to give their employees some training? Does anyone use like the Cornell video or something like that? I see one hand. Mark does. I hear another one. I think that was Bruce that said that.
Yep.
Anybody else? So the Cornell video. Go ahead. Sorry.
I have this book from Penn State, and it's in Spanish, and so it has pictures, and we gather around at the beginning for food safety. And one of my guys will read it in Spanish and write, on the other page that I'm looking at is the English translation. Okay. And then after key pages, will talk about it and ask questions, or let them ask questions if they don't understand something. So that's been like a pretty good help, with the visual pictures of what to do and not to do.
Sweet. That does sound like a good. I think I've seen that tailgate. I think I've seen that tailgate resource before. It's really, really good.
It's Pennsylvania Ag Extension Flipbook. Very good, very useful.
Yeah. And I know Luke Laborde's shop put it together and has been pushing it out for a number of years, and I like it. It's a good resource. Another thing to remember is always follow up a goof with a little training. So whenever somebody messes up, when you see them mess up, reinforce the right way to do things. Always follow it up with a little training. Course corrections are training. It's on the job and it's right then and there. It could only take 5 seconds, but in doing that, you're continuing to show not only that you care about what they're doing, but you care how they're doing it. So it's really important to do that. So keep it up and keep reinforcing the positive behaviors. So once you've done a training for, once you've done interventions that are training, whether that's training them, sitting them down, watching a video, or doing the flip book, or correcting a couple of people over time, watch them again for an hour as part of normal routines. Find another excuse to be in the field for about an hour and observe how often they do the things you taught them. And then take note of when they perform those unsafe activities, and then write it down. Okay. So you've got an observational baseline, and then you have an observation of the results, an observation of what actually your training accomplished. And this is important to compare those two observations to see if it made a difference. And it's really important to think about, okay, this didn't make a difference, so I need to do more or different in this area. Or this made a big difference. I need to keep doing that again and again every year. So to give you a sense of feedback of, okay, what I'm doing is making a difference, or it isn't. So when folks are not doing what you want them to do, it's really a message. The question is, are you listening? It's really hard sometimes when you're busy doing what you're doing on the farm to make a profit, to think about, why aren't people doing certain things? I tell them to do this and they keep doing different. So you have to ask yourself, are the right tools in place? It's hard to wash your hands when there's no soap in the dispenser. It's also really challenging to wash your hands in the in like October when it's cold outside. Well, at least up here it's cold outside, and we're still picking apples in October, and we're expecting farm workers to wash their hands before they go back to work. It's not a pleasant experience. I've done it a couple of times. It's not fun. So having the right tools in place is important. Then the next question is, are the tools in the right places? How often have you gone to write down a record, like to record something on a clipboard, and there's no pen close or no pencil close? If somebody doesn't like writing records in the first place, to have them stop and go find a pen or pencil to write down on the record sheet, or even to go find the record sheet if the record sheet isn't right near where the activity is taking place, that's going to just shut it right down. They're going to be like, forget it, I'm not writing it down. So it's really important to have the tools right at hand when they need, right where and when they need to have that record. It could be a situation where you've got a Google form where someone's got it up on their cell phone while they're in the field and they make the record on the Google form. So keeping those tools in the right place is really, really important. And then the next step is, do the employees have the right training? If you're sending out the guy who lays irrigation pipe to take water samples for water testing, they may not know how to take a water test. They may be, oh, okay, you just want me to grab water. So they may just go ahead and grab water and go, take it to a lab, not really knowing what they're doing. So it's important that they have the right training to go with it. They really ought to know how to test the water and be trained on how to test the water and the kinds of things they need to think about and look for. Does that make sense? Okay, I see some head nods. So this is where I get wonky on you guys, because I'm going to introduce some wonky concepts. First off, there is a term for there's this term for adult education called andragogy, and it's basically how we teach adults. And Knowles comes up, this guy Malcolm Knowles came up with 4 concepts that really resonate a lot when we're trying to teach farm workers or other people on an ag operation how to do stuff around food safety. The first thing is they need to be involved in the planning and the evaluation of their instruction. So you think about it, I've been actively engaging you guys in this training. We've been talking through each step. You've been telling me what you've been writing down. That's really important to model that in every situation. Another thing to keep in mind with Knowles that Knowles brought up is the idea of experience, including mistakes, provides the basis for learning activities. So it's important to draw on those mistakes and talk about it. Then adults are most interested in learning subjects that have immediate relevance and impact to their job or their personal life. So you want to teach them something right about the time they're going to need to use it. And that's also important. And then adult learning is problem-centered rather than content-oriented. Remember, we're trying to change behaviors. What we teach them is really dependent on changing their behaviors. So we start with the end in mind. We want them to behave in certain ways. These are the problems that we have, and we work back from there. So when it comes to adult involvement in education, there's some ways to do that. We talked, like I said, about the example here where I'm engaging you guys in the educational process. But another way to do that with farm workers is using Germ. I don't know if folks are familiar with Germ. It's a glowing substance that folks then can wash their hands, and you use a black light to see how well they did washing their hands. Everyone, if you have an entire farm crew that puts the Germ on their hands and then they go wash their hands and they come back, they can evaluate for themselves how well or poorly they did with respect to washing their hands. So it's kind of nice that way. They know immediately. It's like instant, like, oh, I've got to do a better job around my nails, or I've got to do a better job on the back of my hands. All those things they can see for themselves. So it's kind of nice that way. That's one example. So mistakes can motivate learning. You can ask the farm workers if they've ever had foodborne illness. You'll find that many people have had diarrhea at one point or other, or been vomiting at one point or other because of something they ate, or they can think of no other way it was anything except something they ate. In those cases, they can then talk about, yeah, that was really bad. And then you were off work for, a day, 2 days. Yeah, that was bad. That laid me up for a while. Okay. So let's think about the people that we don't know that are getting it from the food that we're eating. How can we better approach it that way? So understanding that this is the basis for why we're doing this. Immediate relevance is also important. You really want to have training on something that's immediately relevant. Many folks talk about wildlife damage or contamination response right before they go out in the field to do harvest, so that the farm workers understand and know exactly what to do if they see a little pile of poop next to produce or on produce. If they have bird poop on produce or something, they know immediately what to do, whether that's put a flag next to the plant or don't harvest it, but put a flag next to the plant, create a buffer zone, don't harvest around that plant. All those things are important to discuss in advance. And that's a way to have a direct and immediate relevance right before they go into the field to use that knowledge. So another key concept is problem-centered learning. The idea, adults tend to be focused on the problem rather than the content. So a good example is, this is Kyle. Kyle was 2 years old when his mother fed him a spinach smoothie. The spinach had E. coli on it. he got hemolytic uremic syndrome, and he passed away when he was 2 years old. Many people have heard about Kyle from the farm, the managers and the supervisors in Salinas Valley, because in 2006, when he passed away, they started talking about what happens when you get when you get E. coli, and why it was important. And many farmers in general would stick Kyle's picture right next to the reminder to wash their hands. And a lot of farm workers would see Kyle's face, remember the story of Kyle, that Kyle died from eating E. coli laced spinach, and he died. They would use that as a recognition. Oh, I've got to wash my hands. This is why I've got to wash my hands. He's the reason I need to wash my hands. So it helped to reinforce that. And it was really important in that way. So how you deal with non-compliance, you also need to think through in advance. And it will vary based on the number of workers that you have, the kinds of jobs that you have, and how you pay your workers. Because you can change all of these things, and it's important to think about these things. You know, if you've got a lot of workers, you can afford to have one person that you basically dismiss for non-compliance. But you might want to think about a 3 strikes rule, where the first strike, when I see you messing up once, we're going to retrain you and tell you need to do this better. When I see you messing up again, then we're going to change what job you work on. Instead of giving you piece rate, we're going to put you on an hourly position, so that way you're losing a certain amount of ability to go further in terms of monetary gain. It's a little bit of a penalty, just to give you the sense this is really important to me, and you need to be, dealing with something. You need to be doing something better here. And then the last bit is really thinking about putting them on a job where they're not going to come into contact with produce, or food contact surfaces. And how you pay the workers makes a difference. If your piece rate, moving them to an hourly position, that's potentially a way that could give you a certain amount of okay, we can change this, and it's a bit of a stick. So in general, we discussed the 4 concepts of adult education involving students in their education, helping them learn from their own experience and teaching them something they can do right now, and then making the learning problem-centered. And then we talked a little bit about thinking through a policy of what to do in the event a farm worker chooses not to comply. We have to think about that in advance, and we need to have that put in place. Here's my contact info. I'm going to send a PDF of the slides to Jen and Meredith, and they can get you a PDF of the slides, and hopefully we'll have some other background info with this as well, so that you can use it at your disposal. Couple things. This is a free app that we put together in Michigan that's useful anywhere. We have a farm worker texting service. So once a week, a farm worker can receive a text for your farm. You can actually have your farm signed up, and there will be a number, a farm code issued to you. And the farm workers, when they get the text, they can enter the farm code number, and the farmer will receive quarterly a report of all of the farm workers that have seen the texts and registered the code. It is fairly anonymous. It's relatively no strings in terms of it's confidential. There's not a lot of things that you need to do besides signing up as a farm and then giving that code to your farm workers as they